All right, today I want to tell you a little bit about my Mathews V3 31. I want to give you some of my impressions on the bow and why I think maybe Mathews missed the mark a little bit with this bow. So stay tuned and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. So before we get too deep in the discussion, I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer and mention that Mathews is a sponsor of my website over at texasbowhunter.com. If you haven't been over there, be sure to go check us out. We have a great community and discussion forum. But as such, Mathews does provide us a couple of bows every year in exchange for advertising banner ad that we keep at the top of the discussion forum. But we are under no obligation to say anything positive or negative or anything else about the bows. I do value our sponsorship with Mathews. I've enjoyed shooting the bows for many, many years. And so this really isn't a comparison of this bow versus other brands of bows. I am going to do a little bit of comparison to the bow that I was shooting prior to this, which is the Mathews Traverse. And that'll kind of be the basis of the discussion that we've got going on here. We'll talk a little bit about it compared to the original Vertix and the VXR. The V3, of course, is Mathews' flagship line of bows for 2021. It is the successor, as we mentioned, to the original Vertix, which came out a couple of years ago, and then the VXR, which was last year's model, so V3, of course, being version 3 of the bow. And I think that's where, in my opinion, Mathews may have missed the mark a little bit. So I think it falsely gives the impression that this is simply cosmetic changes, or I've seen a lot of people mention incremental changes to the previous model. But I think there's some technology in here that may make this more of a step change than an incremental change. We've got a 31-inch bow, so this is a Mathews V3 31, 31-inch axle-to-axle bow. They also have a 27-inch axle-to-axle. And what they've done is they've actually increased the riser length and then preloaded the limbs to get more of a beyond parallel is what they call it. This is a 31-inch axle-to-axle. The Traverse, of course, is 33-inch axle-to-axle. So the Traverse obviously is 2 inches longer in axle-to-axle. One of the things I really loved about the Traverse and why, if you watched the video that I did previously, I'll put a link to it up there, I did a comparison to the Traverse and the Vertix. We got both of those bows in. I ended up shooting and keeping the Traverse for myself. Because I did like the longer axle-to-axle, a little bit more forgiveness. I felt like it was just a little bit smoother shooting bow. Really liked both of the bows, but I'm not a big short axle-to-axle fan. The interesting thing that I found, though, is the riser length of the Traverse is 28.5 inches, and then on the V3, it's 29.5 inches. So 2 inches shorter axle-to-axle, and yet longer riser length by an inch. And of course, the contention is that that's going to give you a more stable hold and that's going to make more of a difference than your axle-to-axle. So again, I understand why Mathews is marketing this as just another iteration of the Vertix lineup or the V3. The bridge is the exact same, but they did make some changes as you get out into the ends of the risers, some different cutouts. The bow is actually lighter than it was before, and it's actually lighter than the Traverse, which you might expect. As I mentioned, the other thing that they've changed were the limbs on this thing, and you can see that they're a little bit more curved, a little more preloaded than they were on either the Vertix or the Traverse versions of the bow, and so that is, to me, a fairly significant change. Okay, so the other changes that I'm sure a lot of y'all are aware of is the roller guard. A lot of people actually make fun of this roller guard, but I think that's a pretty interesting design concept. It's fairly simple. I'm surprised somebody hasn't done it sooner, but what it does is they raised the roller guard and angled it down so that it actually meets up right directly in the center of the bow. And what that does is a couple of different things. Number one is its true center shot, which is going to help with maintaining and achieving the timing between the cams. And then the other thing it's going to do is that's going to be the optimal placement for vane clearance. And for those of you that like to shoot a higher offset, higher standoff vane, that could be pretty important. So the other thing, which probably is a little bit more cosmetic, and of course they'll tell you that otherwise, is this nano harmonic dampener system. I can't speak to that. Supposedly it makes it a little bit quieter and damper than what it was before. They've extended this out a little bit, and the placement of that, and so supposedly it gives a little bit more forward balance for the bow, and so I'll take their word on that. As far as the cams go, we talked about that. That's the same as in the previous models of the bow, which is the same as what I had on the Traverse. However, the one difference in the Traverse and the Vertix is the Traverse did not have the switch weight modules. The Vertix was the first bow that came out with that. That continued on the VXR, and of course now with the V3 that continued. And I didn't put a whole lot of stock into that when I had the Traverse, and I thought it was kind of a cool thing, but I actually questioned the value of that. However, I will point out that I got this bow the week after it was the launch date, which I think was on November 17th. I actually got it the day before Thanksgiving. I took the bow immediately up to Brush to Bay Outfitters so that I could go ahead and get things set up. I was able to tie in the D-loop. I was able to put in the peep, put the rest, the Ultra Rest Integrate MX. I put that back on here, but I wasn't able to shoot the bow at all. It was the day before Thanksgiving. The shop was closing. We were getting ready to go out of town, so I left without even being able to shoot an arrow through the bow. So later that night, I broke my hand. And then I got back here, I was not able to draw the bow at 70 pounds. I was actually worried that my season was over. You may have seen the video that I posted before of the Management 8-pointer that I shot. Obviously my season wasn't over, but the only way, absent of finding another lighter weight bow, was I was able to call Jeff over at Cinnamon Creek Ranch. He overnighted me some 60-pound switch weight modules, and then I was back in business. I was drawing somewhere between 55, 58 pounds. I was able to draw it enough to quickly paper tune it in 3 shots. Then I took it to the property that we hunt, fired another 3 shots, decided in at 20 yards, and I was back in business. And I think I shot that buck, a spike, a doe, and a couple of hogs with this bow set at 55 to 58 pounds. Rather than my season being over, it was just a matter of putting in those switch weight modules. After the season, I had intended to put the 70-pound modules back in, the hands fully healed, but I decided to go ahead and leave those on at least through the off season. I got a new sight that I'm testing out, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a single pin sight. I'm wanting to do a lot more shooting, a little bit more long range shooting, and in order to shoot more, I wanted to go ahead and keep that 60-pound module on here to save my shoulders a little bit. So right now I'm shooting right at 60 pounds, shooting about 260 feet per second. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that, and we'll actually do some shooting in a future video. Other specs, the Vertix has a 6-inch brace height versus the 6 3/8 inch of the Traverse. I think that's very similar to what the VXR and both the Vertix were. I think it's probably the same. So anyway, that was a real quick overview and a few impressions that I have of this bow, and again, compared to the Traverse that I have. And again, I think this is, you know, a lot of people on TexasBowhunter.com, other forums, other video reviews that I've seen talk about just the incremental changes and cosmetic changes that have been made to this bow, but I don't think they're giving it the credit that it deserves. This bow, I think there's a lot of technology that has gone into it, and the engineering of extending the riser while being able to shorten the axle to axle gives you the maneuverability of a shorter bow, and yet the shootability and the forgiveness that you're looking for in typically a longer bow, longer axle to axle bow. I'm looking forward to shooting this a little bit more. I do want to do some shooting tests, long range shooting tests compared to the Traverse, so I'm going to put another rest on that one, and we'll do some comparison videos for that as well. But for now, I'm really impressed with this bow. I'm more impressed than I thought I might be when I first saw the specs and saw it come out. And I'm looking forward to continuing to shoot it. By this point, I'm sure a lot of y'all have this bow, have shot this bow, so I'm curious to get your take on it. What do you think about it? Is there actually something to extending the riser and shortening the axle to axle and still having a really shootable bow and the forgiveness of a longer axle to axle bow? Or is that just some sort of a marketing gimmick? Let me know what bow you were shooting before you shot this one, or if you're shooting it now and considering a new one. Let me know what bow you have and why you think this bow might or might not be better. Thank you for joining me. Again, we've got some more videos coming about the V3, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but we have yard chickens, and one of them apparently is laying an egg, so she makes a lot of racket when she does that.